You go through life assuming the world around you is exactly as it seems. The ground is solid. The past is fixed. Your thoughts belong to you. But if you stop for just a second, if you really pay attention, things start to feel a little off. Not in a dramatic way, but in the tiny cracks that appear when you start questioning the things you've never thought to doubt. Take something as simple as looking in a mirror. That reflection, you see it every day, but it's not what other people see. You've never actually seen your real face, only flipped versions, distorted through photos, reflections, and memories. And yet, you believe you know exactly what you look like. It's not something you question, but should you? Your brain isn't showing you reality, it's showing you what's useful. Your eyes don't capture the full picture. They take in bits and pieces, filling in gaps, so the world feels seamless. Your ears tune out most sounds, only letting in what your mind thinks you need to hear. And your memory? That's not a recording. It's a story your brain rewrites every time you recall it, slightly changing details without you ever noticing. Time works the same way. Think about it. An hour of boredom stretches endlessly, but a year can disappear in a blink. Some moments seem frozen, others never even register. It's not time that changes, it's your perception. Your mind is constantly editing, cutting, and stitching reality together like a film director, deciding what stays in the final cut. And then there's the past. You probably feel confident in your memories, but how many of them are real? Studies show that every time you remember something, your brain reconstructs it, changing small details, filling in gaps, sometimes even creating things that never happened. The version of the past you trust so deeply might not even exist the way you think it does. This isn't just speculation. In the 20th century, cognitive scientist Donald Hoffman proposed something that still rattles researchers today. What if nothing we see is truly real? His theory suggests that evolution didn't design us to see the world accurately. It designed us to see the world in a way that keeps us alive. Colors, objects, even the way we experience space and time, they're not objective truths. They're a user interface like icons on a screen, giving us just enough information to function, but never revealing what's actually underneath. So what does that mean? If your brain is constantly filtering, editing, and rewriting the world, what's real? If everything feels solid until you take a closer look, how much of what you believe is just an illusion? So if what we see, hear, and even remember is just a version of reality, one that's been carefully constructed by our minds, then what's actually real? That's where things get unsettling. Think about dreams. When you're inside one, it feels just as real as waking life. You don't question the physics, the logic, or why things shift in impossible ways. It's only when you wake up that you realize how bizarre it all was. But what if waking life is just another version of that? A more stable, more consistent dream, but still a dream. Philosophers have debated this for centuries. Plato's allegory of the cave suggested that humans are like prisoners, watching shadows on a wall, mistaking them for reality. René Descartes went even further, questioning whether an all-powerful deceiver could be feeding us false experiences, making us believe in a world that isn't actually there. These weren't just abstract thought experiments. They were serious attempts to understand if we could ever truly know what's real. Science, in many ways, has started catching up. Take the double-slit experiment, a mind-bending quantum mechanics test. When scientists shoot particles through two slits, those particles behave differently depending on whether they are being observed or not. It's as if reality itself changes based on whether or not someone is looking. If that doesn't shake your understanding of the world, nothing will. Even our sense of self is up for debate. Your brain isn't one solid, unified thing. It's a collection of systems working together. Neuroscientists have found cases where damage to certain parts of the brain can completely shift a person's personality, beliefs, or even their sense of identity. If a small physical change can alter who someone is, then what does that say about the stability of you? And here's where it gets even stranger. Some theories suggest that what we experience as consciousness, the thing that makes you, you, isn't coming from the brain at all. Instead, it might be more like a signal that the brain receives rather than something it produces. This would explain certain mysteries of human experience, from intuition to out-of-body experiences, to the feeling that there's more to existence than what we can see. It raises an uncomfortable question. If your brain is just a filter, showing you a simplified version of reality, then what exactly are you missing? What else is out there, just beyond the edges of what your mind allows you to perceive? So if reality isn't what it seems, and if our minds are only giving us a limited version of the truth, then what exactly is out there that we aren't seeing? Here's where things get truly unsettling. There's a condition known as blind sight, where people who are completely blind, due to brain damage, not eye damage, can still detect movement, navigate obstacles, and even see without knowing they're seeing. Their eyes work fine, but the part of their brain responsible for processing sight is damaged, and yet some part of them still perceives something. But what? It suggests that vision isn't just about the eyes, it's about what the brain allows us to see. So, what if there are things all around us that our brains simply aren't wired to detect? Now take this idea even further. Have you ever been in a room and felt like someone was watching you, only to turn around and see someone staring? Or had a gut feeling about something before it happened? Science might write these off as coincidences, but what if they're glimpses of something our minds aren't normally tuned into? The human brain is filtering out massive amounts of information every second, because if it didn't, you'd be completely overwhelmed. You'd notice every tiny sound, every movement in the corner of your eye, every shift in temperature. Instead, your brain cuts out anything it doesn't think is relevant. But what if, just for a second, it lets something through that isn't supposed to be there? Think about it. The human eye can only see 0.0035% of the electromagnetic spectrum. That means 99.9965% of all light, energy, and information is completely invisible to us. Infrared, ultraviolet, radio waves, X-rays, it's all around us, but we'll never see it. Now apply that same principle to perception. What if consciousness itself is just a small slice of something much bigger, something our brains aren't designed to handle? And here's where things take a turn. Some of the world's greatest minds have suggested that reality might not be external at all. Theoretical physicists like John Wheeler believed that consciousness could be playing a direct role in shaping the universe. That reality might exist only because we observe it. Ancient spiritual traditions have echoed this idea for centuries, describing life as a dream, an illusion, or a projection of the mind. Could they have been right all along? If reality is something we construct, if the world around us is just an interpretation, then what happens when we stop accepting the version we've been given? What happens when you stop assuming that what you see is all there is? Let's push this even further. If reality is something our minds construct, what happens when that construction starts to fall apart? Take the Ganzfeld effect, for example. It's a psychological experiment where people are placed in a completely uniform environment. No patterns, no changes, just total sensory deprivation. After a short time, the brain panics. It wasn't designed for nothingness. It starts filling in the gaps, creating sounds, images, and even entities that aren't there. In other words, the brain would rather generate an entire reality than deal with the fact that there's nothing to process. Now, here's where things get eerie. People who've undergone extreme sensory deprivation, like deep cave explorers or solo sailors in the ocean, report bizarre experiences. Some hear voices whispering their name, others see figures standing in the darkness, and a few even claim to have full conversations with people who don't exist. But what if they do? What if these aren't just hallucinations, but glimpses into something our everyday senses filter out? This raises a question. If our brains are actively filling in reality, how much of what we experience is actually real? Now let's go back to everyday life. Think about your routine, the way you wake up, go about your day, and react to things around you. How much of it is you? And how much of it is just habit? A script running in the background, dictating what you'll think, how you'll feel, and what you'll do? Studies in neuroscience suggest that up to 95% of our decisions are made subconsciously. That means the way you choose your words, the things you notice, even your emotional reactions. Most of it isn't coming from a conscious thought process. It's pre-programmed, shaped by past experiences, environment, and even things as subtle as the lighting in a room. This makes you wonder, how much of your life is truly yours? And here's where everything starts coming together. What if your entire perception of reality is just a result of whatever script your brain is running? What if the version of yourself that you know, the thoughts you have, the emotions you feel, is just a reflection of deeper patterns that were set in motion long before you were aware of them? If that's true, then who's really in control? Or better yet, what happens when you decide to take control? Here's something to sit with. If our brains are constantly constructing reality, then what happens when we start questioning the blueprint? Think about déjà vu. You've been somewhere before, even though you haven't. You know what's coming next, but there's no way you could. It's as if reality hiccups. For just a moment, the script glitches. Some scientists explain it as a misfiring of neurons, a short circuit in the brain that makes a new experience feel like a memory. But there's something unsettling about that, isn't there? If your mind can trick you into thinking you've lived a moment before, what else is it capable of fabricating? And it doesn't stop there. Think about dreams. Every night you slip into a world where things feel real, where you see, hear, touch, even think, as if you're awake. You experience emotions, complex scenarios, even moments of insight, but then you wake up and it all disappears. So what makes waking life any different? If you've ever had a dream that felt as vivid as reality, how can you be sure you're not dreaming right now? This isn't just some abstract theory. There have been documented cases of people getting stuck in dreamlike states where they can't tell if they're awake or asleep. Some develop a condition called derealization, where the world around them starts to feel fake, like a set design or a movie playing on a screen. Their senses still work, but something is off. The texture of reality feels distant, like they're watching life unfold from behind glass. And here's the part that messes with your head. Some of these people recover. They go back to feeling normal, but for them, normal no longer feels real. It's just the version of reality they're choosing to accept again. Now let's take this even deeper. There's an old philosophical question. If a tree falls in a forest and no one is around to hear it, does it make a sound? Most people laugh it off. It's just a thought experiment. But think about it seriously for a moment. If you weren't here to experience this moment, this exact second in time, does it even exist? If everything we perceive is just electrical signals in our brain, then does anything have a form outside of our perception of it? This isn't just philosophy. Quantum physics backs it up. The infamous double-slit experiment proved that light behaves differently depending on whether or not it is being observed. That means, on some level, the act of looking changes reality itself. If that's true for particles of light, what does it say about the world around us? And more importantly, what does it say about you? Are you experiencing reality? Or are you just interpreting it, the way a radio tunes into a signal? And if that's the case, then maybe, just maybe, reality is something you can change. Let's take this to its logical conclusion. If everything we perceive is filtered through the mind, then how much of what we believe to be real is just an illusion of understanding? Think about memories. You probably assume that your past is a solid, unchangeable thing, something fixed in time. But that's not true. Memory is malleable. Every time you recall an event, your brain rewrites it, like a document being constantly edited. Scientists have shown that even the most vivid memories are filled with distortions, gaps, and outright fabrications. This means that the past, the thing that defines you, isn't even as real as you think. But let's go deeper. What about the present moment? Surely the now is real, right? But here's something unsettling. By the time you consciously process what's happening around you, it's already in the past. Your brain is working with a delay, meaning that what you think of as right now is already a fraction of a second old. You're always experiencing reality on a time lag, just reacting to something that has already happened. So if your memories aren't real, and even the present moment is just a delayed interpretation, then where exactly do you exist? It gets stranger. Some neuroscientists argue that your sense of self, the voice in your head that you call you, is nothing more than a narrative function your brain uses to make sense of things. They've found cases where people lose entire parts of their brain and yet continue to function, sometimes without even realizing something is missing. If different parts of your brain are responsible for speech, emotion, decision-making, and memory, then what exactly is the you that ties them all together? And if that sense of self can be altered, damaged, or even erased, then who or what is actually in control? Now let's step outside of science for a second. In spiritual traditions, particularly in Eastern philosophy, there's a belief that the self, the thing you think of as me, is an illusion. That consciousness isn't something inside of you, but rather something you're tuning into, like a radio signal. In this perspective, what we call reality is more like a collective dream, a projection that we're all interacting with, shaped by beliefs, conditioning, and perception. So let's put everything together. Your memories aren't reliable. Your present moment is already in the past. Your sense of self is just a collection of thoughts that your brain strings together. And reality itself, it changes depending on how you observe it. So, what's left? What if you're not actually thinking, you're just remembering patterns? What if the way you experience the world isn't truth, but just a loop of past experiences that shapes what you expect to see? Maybe you're not a person moving through reality. Maybe reality is just something your mind is constantly creating, like a dream you haven't woken up from yet. And if that's the case, then the real question isn't what is real. It's who is the one watching? At the end of the day, reality is only as real as you believe it to be. So what do you think? Is your mind just playing back patterns? Or is there something deeper, something beyond perception? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Let's start a conversation. And if this made you question reality, then stick around, because we're only just getting started.